so I want to go back and spend a little bit more time, just in your upbringing.
Yeah.
Come from an entrepreneurial family. I know your dad ran a business. He went to Harvard. He invented the four-wheeler.
So my dad worked for a company called Polaris, right? So everybody knows Polaris, big maker of snowmobiles, ATVs, side-by-sides, motorcycles, right? Well, I think they sold their motorcycle business, but when I was growing up, my dad was an engineer by trade. So and I didn't know this until, I got to be probably, teens, right? And I understood some of these things. Well, he was on the team. Well, he was actually the vice president of engineering. So he was one of the project leads on designing the first four-wheeler, because back in the day, everybody had three-wheelers, right? So there's motorcycles, and then they're like, well, let's make three-wheelers. So Honda came out with like the Big Red. I think if anybody on the podcast understands Big Red, that was like the tricycle of terror. It really was, man, because going over ditches when you try to land, right? Think when the thing would jar. I mean, it was crazy, right? So we crashed so many of those, but not when I was small. I'm talking, when I was older, but when I was young, I remember the first thing I ever got from my dad was a snowmobile. I probably got one at like 3 years old, and wow. I still have pictures of me driving out in the backyard, because my birthday is in October. So sometimes in Minnesota, it doesn't snow in October, even though it's late October. So I remember there was a light dusting on that, because I remember seeing the picture. It was like a Polaroid, and there was a light dusting. And I remember telling my dad, I'm going out there. And I remember he had to, take me out there and show me what track I could go on. And I was out there for probably, I bet you 20 minutes, just going on like grass and dirt and whatever. It was the greatest thing ever, man. But so I grew up, around all those kind of like sports activities. So, whether it was motorcycles, snowmobiles, four-wheelers, jet skis, if it was rideable, I was trying to race it. I was trying to race my friends, race it, because we grew up in a town where half the town, maybe 3/4 of the town worked at Polaris, right? So it was in this town of like 2,000 people. And there was another facility like an hour away that built Articat, right? So Articat was the other big Polaris competitor back in the day. Was actually started by the same guy that started Polaris, started Articat. One of the same guys, his name was Edgar Ateen, and he started Articat too, because he got pissed at Polaris leadership and went down the road and said, screw you guys, I'm going to start, this. So it was pretty cool. And then I remember probably around 10, 11, 12 years old, I started racing, like not professionally, but, we'd go to like Canterbury Downs in Minneapolis, or we'd go to like up to Duluth. They had like up at Lutzen, they would have, and these were all like ski resorts. So they would turn the ski resort into like a snowmobile festival type of a thing. And I was probably racing from, like I said, early teens, maybe even earlier than that, up until I was like 16, 17 years old. And then I decided, I got to go to college. This is cool. It's fun, but I'm not going to make a life out of this, which there's a lot of people that do. Maybe I could have. Yeah. Maybe I could have, but I was like, at that time there was X Games and X Sports and all that stuff, but it wasn't as big as it is now, like where that Ricky Carmichael makes, millions of dollars. The top guy was like making, like maybe $100,000 type of thing, just because it wasn't as big back then.
It was big in Minnesota.
Yeah, it was big in Minnesota. It just wasn't big worldwide or nationwide yet, right? So, but then that was kind of my upbringing, was we were always outdoors. So it was either on the lake fishing, on the lake boating, on, snowmobiling, hunting, fishing, camping. We would it was like every place we'd go, it was always to do something outdoors. My dad's a huge outdoorsman. And I would say I'm not as big. I'm a huge outdoorsman, but he's the king. I mean, he loves the outdoors, and he seems to be good at everything. Like if people want to go fishing, they always go fishing with Chuck, he knows where the hot spots are because other people tell him where the hot spots are, but he always knows, like if I'm out there and I'm like, man, we can't catch anything. He's like, go, where's your coordinates? Go to point number 3. So then you drive into point number 3, literally put your line down and boom, you're getting nice fish. So it's like, it's wild, so he's always been like, it's just like everything he touches turns to gold from that perspective. Because he's a good person though. I think that's why, like life always treats people that are good better. I just feel like that. Like if those people that have a good heart, that are compassionate, empathetic, and are for people, I really feel like life is for those type of people. I really do. You know, no matter how hard it is for you and no matter how bad it gets for you, he always said, if you can look for the good and find the good, and every day, every night, I remember growing up that he'd put me to bed. He would say, what were the 3 good things that happened to you today? So he'd always try to put you to bed with a positive mind. And my mom was always very positive too. She almost, like, she's not with us anymore. She passed away in 2011, but yeah, it sucked. But she passed away actually from she had Pick's disease, so it's like a rare form of Alzheimer's, and it basically turned her back into a child. So my dad tried to take care of her for a couple of years, and then we had to put her into one of those assisted living facilities, and she got so bad that they said, well, she's not really for it, because she would do it a lot of screaming, you know, like think of a kid, right? And then put him into a 60-some-year-old body, right? And that's basically what my mom was. Super nice lady, you know, growing up. So she would never, like, even as she got older, you know how like some of those older folks, as they get older, they kind of get more cranky and curmudgeon, right? Like she actually was almost more like brazen and just like, okay, I was just like, you could hear mom coming, right? So yeah. But yeah, so I would say we always had really good life growing up. Our family was super tight. We'd always get together with all of the, like her side had 9 brothers and sisters. My dad's side had like 7, I think, 7 and 9. And then even now, like to get those family pictures, I mean, they're gigantic, you know, because all the cousins and now, you know, secondary cousins and third cousins and all kinds of stuff, you know. So it was fun growing up in that family. It still is fun. You know, we get together a lot. We try, you know, last couple of years, it's not been fun because of COVID and whatever is going on. But outside of that, we always try to, you know, have awesome times together.
Yeah. So the part of Minnesota that you grew up in, is that close to Wisconsin? Is it close to?
So no, we're by the chimney stack. So if you look at Minnesota, right, and then at the very top, you're like, what is that little chimney thing, right? That's called the Northwest Angle. So that's part when I guess whoever was going through the woods and figured out where the deal was, they actually missed the line, and that's how because that's actually part of Canada, the chimney stack, right? Because
wow.
So they call it the Northwest Angle. So you actually, to get to there, sometimes you have to go through Canada to get back to the US. It's very weird.
Got you. Okay. So yeah. Snowboard, that's going to make perfect sense because
yeah.
Here we're like, well, when can we use the snowboard? We get maybe, you know, December, it can be 85 degrees out here now sometimes.
Yeah.
Lately. But I remember so you were way further up, but I remember driving through Wisconsin when I lived in Chicago at the time, and I would assume that the weather in Minnesota is probably similar if it's colder outside.
It's similar. The only thing that makes it a little bit more cold in northern Minnesota is they got like this vortex, right? So there's always this cold line that, like, from probably maybe 20 miles south of there and north, it just, like, during polar vortexes, it just gets whipping cold, right? Like 40 degrees or minus 40 for, like, say a couple days, 3-4 days. So I mean, it gets bad. So I think the nice thing about, like, Wisconsin, which is beautiful, number one, it's got some hills, but number two as well is I don't think it's as low, right? Like I think probably Wisconsin's maybe at a couple thousand feet, where literally Roseau, Minnesota, I think is 1,000 feet above sea level.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So that's why it gets cold.
I'm just going to describe the conditions to you that I was driving in. You tell me if it's similar, one, and if it was the same response. Okay.
Yeah.
So when I'm driving, there's snow coming down and I'm slipping and sliding all around the road. And I get to my destination. I was visiting a music store, I remember. And I got to the store and I was talking to the owner of this store. And I'm like, man, this traffic is something. He's like, oh, that's nothing out there. Was it like that where you're from?
So I'll tell you, so in Fargo too. So that's where I went to college, and Amy and I were there for 20 years, right? Fargo is very notorious for wind and creating drifts, right? Well, it's nothing like the drifts in most people's mind. They're like, well, yeah, but it drifts just snow, right? Well, it's snow until 40-mile-an-hour winds goes over it for like a week, and it turns into literally a concrete wall, right? So, like, and they're on these, country bumpkin roads. So, me, we've been, on every country road in North Dakota, Minnesota, South Dakota in 12 years, right? So, like, when you're going down these roads, you're like, oh, okay, that doesn't look so bad. You got to judge them like, is that a freshly packed drift, or has that been there a while? Because when you go through them, you can get hung up, right? And then that was the thing, like, if you got hung up and now the wind's blowing, you don't know which way. Like, okay, was the last farmhouse that way or was it that way? And the last thing you want to do is get out, because we've had some people that, die, not from our team, but like in the country that, they get stuck, they try to go for help, and they get turned around and they didn't put on enough clothing, right? And now there's nowhere, they basically die of hypothermia. That's a real thing. It happens more than we'd like to admit in the North,
So if you are, selling insurance in the Great North area, northern Minnesota, one, make sure that you have enough clothing in your car at all times.
100%. We'd always have that.
Yeah. And certainly pay attention and make sure it's not a hard, wall.
I mean, I took off so many ground effects, like the ground effects on cars and spoilers and all, like ground spoilers, like so many of them. And then the other thing too was, like, after a hard day of, out on the road like that, bounding through drifts, if you had a truck, right? Like I had F-150s and Toyota Tundras and all kinds of fun stuff out there. The other thing that would get you, if the snow didn't, was the snow packed into your wheels, bro. You know what I mean? So then all of a sudden you're driving down the road and you're like, bro, why does this sound like my wheels about to fall? Because you got 5 pounds of snow packed in there. So then in the middle of the winter, you got to go try to find a place that's got one of those manual car wash, and then you'd go in there and try to spray it out. Or we got even smarter later in life, is we would carry the really long screwdrivers so we could fit it in there and then twirl it around, try to get it out of there. But man, it was wild. Look,
important stuff that he's saying, because these are the types of sacrifices and conditions that you have to work in if you want to be successful in this.
Yeah, if you want to make it out to that guy that said, I ain't coming into town, the only way you're going to sell me is if you come out here. Well, you're going to go out there, right?
There you go, man. How'd you get into insurance, man? How'd you actually get into the business?
So I wish there was like this big, epiphany story, like, oh my God, I went through 70 jobs and, then all of a sudden I came across some. I cannot tell you the person that introduced me to insurance. And I would say that if I were to be honest, that every person along the way has told me to get the hell out of insurance. From my dad to my wife, but in the beginning, because I remember I just got married right when I went to PMA the second time, which was in 2009. Yes. My wife and I literally just were going to get married, because we got married in 2006, right? So we were married like 3 years, okay? And I remember this, they called me, PMA did. I remember she's no longer with us, but she was actually one of the really good recruiters back in the day. She was from Texas. I can't remember what her name was. Super nice gal though. So she called me, she said, hey, blah, 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 we're going to be in town. And they do, how they do the big, we're going to have a group interview type of thing. And I said, okay, but I just, to be fair, warn to you, I used to work with you guys, if you know that, back in 2002, right? So I was short stint for like 3-6 months there. And then they came calling again. So I didn't know if there was going to be like some trouble, because, when I quit, it was more like my dad had cancer and I said, look, I can't come back. And they're like, are you sure? And I said, yeah. So there was kind of a falling out there because they didn't understand. And I was like, that's fine. I got to go do what I got to do. Right. So the second time around, I met with the recruiter. It was one of those big conference rooms. There's probably like 30 chairs in there. And he's like, yeah, everybody's going to come in, because I got there maybe 15 minutes early. He's like, yeah, everybody will start filing in there. It turned out to be me and him 45 minutes just chatting about insurance. And I still remember to this day him telling me, yeah, you'll be able to make $500,000 within like a year. And I was thinking, okay, bro, just relax. Okay, just relax. Okay. But I go home to my wife and I tell her, hey, I got this, because I was doing interviews and I'm like, hey, I got this interview. I think this is the one. And she said, why? I said, because this guy said I can make $500,000 in a year. And I said, I really believed him. For some reason, I really believed him in my heart of hearts. I was like, okay, yeah, all right. So I go home, tell my wife, we're just freshly married, just freshly moved into a house, don't have kids yet, thank God, yet. But so we just move into the house and I tell her, hey, I'm going to go on the road 4 days a week and I got to pay for that going on the road. And there's no salary, no guarantee. But the guy said I'd make $500,000. And knowing how crazy, but here's the thing, you got to understand, I'm always one of these guys that when I feel like somebody's telling me the truth, I actually believe it as though it's truth. Whether they're telling me a shit pot of whatever, right? And so I go meet with these guys. One was Joe Kuiper, who was in the business with us. He was a state manager. That was my first manager. So like to have a cool guy like Joe, because we always used to call him cool guy Joe, because one time he was in a house, which is a funny story. He was in a house and he was selling, and it got down to the end, and this one of their sons who had some disabilities kept tapping him on the shoulder. Hey, Joe, hey, Joe, hey, Joe, you good guy, Joe, you good guy, Joe. Joe's like, yep. Just trying to, just keep him distracted long enough so he can get the papers signed. Cause this is like Joe's like first month in the business, dude. This guy is awesome at insurance, been in insurance for now 12, 13 years. This was his first month in the business. The guy, like Joe, and the guy, Joe turns to him, he grabs him by the face and puts the biggest, sloppiest kiss all over his face. And the people are like, OMG, right? And Joe's like, he doesn't know what to do. And they're like, go sit down. I can't remember, his name is Mark or whatever. Go sit down, Mark. You're not supposed to be doing that. And they finish up the paperwork. But I remember it wasn't like maybe a month later, and Joe's at one of the first FLTs with him and I. It must have been like maybe 6 months later. But I remember them telling that story because Tim and Rick told that story and everybody was just dying, right? And it stayed with him for 12 years, right? And those are the crazy things that happen when you're selling insurance, dude. It really does. Yeah. But it's awesome. It's awesome too, because those are the connections, dude, that last a lifetime. And if you then leverage that and use that to your advantage, that every house can't get any worse than that house, you'll be successful out there. Because what's the worst that's going to happen? Some stranger kissing you in a house, right? It doesn't get much stranger than that, right?
No, it doesn't. And if you can survive in this business, you can survive anywhere.
I'm telling you, like, that's why most employers, when they hear, hey, I've been successful at insurance, or they know that you've been on the road, so like you're always in demand, because you know how to treat people, you probably have good customer service, and you're accountable, because that's what you have to do when you're in insurance.
Your work ethic is going to be off the chain if you've been successful.
Yeah. 100%.
Right. And they know it too.
Yeah.